6 years. 6 entire years of waiting for Silksong. I still can't believe that it's here, and I've completed the entire thing 100% from start to finish, from top to bottom. It was an amazing adventure to play. But the pinnacle of all of this has to be the bosses. The bosses are what make Hollow Knight and Silksong because they tend to always be so unique that it honestly flatters me. And I decided to do probably one of my biggest projects on this channel today. Today, I welcome you to That's right, a full ranking of every boss in Silksong. This video took a very long while to make, and I've been thinking about it ever since I fully beat the game. I had to make an entire script for this, but I bet it'll be worth it. I hope so. Also, before we actually start, I'm going to address the few bosses that won't be featured on this list. First off, Summon Savior doesn't count because it can only be played in the no death mode of Silksong, Steel Soul mode, and since I'm not crazy enough to do that on Hollow Knight, the same is gonna apply here. Garmin and Zaza, as well as Chakra, are also not going to be on this list, because I never found them. These bosses are only met within specific conditions of Act 2, and since I never found out about them until after I got to Act 3, they were both inaccessible. Maybe I'll find the time to go fight all of them, but I don't think I'll likely be doing that. At least, anytime soon. Now that that's all out of the way, I'll be telling you how I'll rank the bosses. There won't be any really specific types of criteria here, but some examples will be stuff like the atmosphere, music, attacks, flow, movement, creativity, you get the point. I'll be putting every boss in tiers, from S to F, S being the best and F being the worst. And you can probably guess what the other tiers do. They won't be ranked in numerical order for the time being until we rank all the bosses regularly. Then we can get to the final numerical ranking. The boss list goes as follows. Moss Mother Bellbeast, Lays Fourth Core, Sister Splinter, Widow, Last Judge, Cockbird Dancers, Lace B2, Grandmother Silk, Scarsing, Carmelita, Nihilus, Shrine Guardian, Seth, Crust King Khan, Lost Lace, Morrowing, Double Moss Mother, Great Conchfly, Skull Tyrant, Savage Beastfly, Trobia, Ford Brother, Cygnus and Gron, Raging Conchfly, Golden Grey, Disgrace Sheffield Goyle, Rude Mother, Father of the Flame, Second Sentinel, Voltworm, Bell Eater, Lost Garment, Crawfather, Tormented Trobio, Pale Stag, Watcher of the Edge, Gur the Outcast, Clover Dancers, Plasmavite, Zango, Pinstress, Phantom, Unraveled, and First Sinner. Wow. One more thing. I'll be going through these bosses in act order. So I'll do Act 1, then Act 2, then Act 3. I'll also be splitting those into smaller sections as well. Each will start out with the main bosses, next will be the optional bosses, and then finally, the final boss of the act. Now that that's all said and done, let's finally get into the ranking. To start off with Act 1, we have Moss Mother. Moss Mother is a very basic boss to get you started out with the game. She does nothing more than she needs to do, and basically nothing less. It makes sense since you always tend to need an introductory boss to make sure you understand the fundamentals of the game. Like, she has a basic swoop, rock projectiles, a little enemy, just basic stuff. So, in that case, Moss Mother isn't bad, but isn't necessarily good either. She's basically just the white bread of Silksong bosses. I think Moss Mother is simply okay, and is especially good with what her job is, but comparing her to some of the other bosses from down the line on this list, she doesn't exactly stand out too much, and that's why I'll put her in C tier. Bell Beast is another fairly basic boss within the game. I do tend to like the bell projectiles, and I really feel like this boss tends to teach you to be more alert. Though it can be annoying at times when the only way you can tell if the Bell Beast is either staying on ground or jumping during an attack is from particles either being low or high, which I, and most likely others, didn't notice at first. I would still say the Bell Beast takes more creativity than Moss Mother with its more fast and alert gameplay, even if it isn't by much, so I'll be giving Bell Beast a B tier. Also, Team Cherry has said you're petting the Bell Beast by hitting them, so are we just calming them down the entire fight? Huh. It's honestly surprising we're only at the third main boss of the game, and it's already starting to get really good. Lace is the one that, while not amazing, is still great in boss design. Lace is the first boss to teach you about parries and make sure to keep you from getting greedy by telegraphing your moves, and that's why I really tend to love the fight. She will be getting biased from her two other versions that'll come down the line though, as I consider them both to be better, so she'll be getting B tier. Fourth Course is really good in its gameplay. It's a giant robot, so it always has slow but heavy hits. Also, I love the way he destroys the terrain. It proceeds to provide not only an extra fun challenge, but also lets you understand how to use the Drifter's Cloak. Another cool thing that I actually never noticed in my first playthrough was that you could actually ride the wind streams up in the second phase to the rock above to end the boss early. And I think that's pretty cool. I'll give Fourth Course an A tier. Sister Splinter is another great boss. I really like the mechanics of vines sprouting from the ceiling, and since most players will just have Silk Spear at this point, it allows you to utilize them more. The claw attacks can also be fun to maneuver at times. Also, unlike another boss, the enemies aren't annoying since the arena is so open-spaced. Sister Splinter is kind of leaning between B and A tier right now, but since I like the boss a lot, I'll give Sister Splinter a low A tier. At this point in the game, you'll have gone through a lot to get here, so the game starts to ramp up the difficulty. Widow is fast-paced and chaotic, and a really fun type of chaotic at that. It's the first boss on this list that I also really paid attention to the music of. It represents the intensity of the fight, and I love it. Widow is basically always on the move, so you have to make sure to pay attention and stay alert at all times. The second phase gets even faster and more chaotic, as well as having raining bells from the top as an attack, so you have to watch out everywhere. Widow is honestly great in so many ways, and will be getting a high A tier. Morwing is kind of an odd boss, but in a good way. Morwing is fast in movement. Well, more erratic, if anything, but that tends to make the boss so much better. The erraticness is something you don't get too much of in Silksong bosses, and is pretty unique to Morwing. This is mainly because it increases the challenge of his attacks without having to speed them up, and proceeds to make the fight more enjoyable. Lots of people before the patch came out were complaining about the difficulty of the boss, though I honestly find what makes Morwing hard to be what I like about the boss. While I don't think it's good enough to get A tier, I would say it still deserves a high B tier. I really don't know what you want me to say about this. It's the Moss Mother, but there's 2 of them now. Literally can't say anything else about this boss since none of the attacks are different. The only exciting thing about Double Moss Mother is that if you fight them in Act 3, they become void. I'm not counting that since I'm ranking just the base version of these bosses, but even if I did, it still wouldn't make that much of a difference anyway. I'll just put them in D tier and move on. The Great Conflice is another boss that's very basic. They tend to drill around the arena for basically 60% of the fight, but every so often one of them pops out of the wall to reposition or to spit drills at you. The boss isn't very memorable, though I do like how only one of them dies and proceeds to hint at another boss fight later down the line with the other one still alive. They get C tier. Once again, Skull Tyrant is another boss that isn't really memorable at all. They can sometimes lunge at you, as well as rain rocks down to you. But besides that, Skull Tyrant basically charges back and forth for nearly the entire fight. Skull Tyrant is another boss that I can't really find anything to talk about, so Skull Tyrant goes into high D tier. Here we go. I have a lot to say about Savage Beastfly. This obese bug has been known from everywhere, but not positively. For starters, the Savage Beastfly doesn't really have anything special with their basic attacks, in which they either slam into the wall or ground. The main reason why this boss is hated to the freaking moon and back is because of one thing: enemy spam. Now, I don't simply hate enemy spam. If you've been paying attention so far, you know I thought the enemies in the Sister Splinter boss fight were fine, but that was because, first off, the arena was more open spaced, and Sister Splinter was also basically always on the ceiling. Meanwhile, Savage Beastfly is moving all around the arena while the enemies are still alive. Not to mention, it gets even worse, since later in the fight, he spawns 2 of them at a time. Well, isn't that just what I wanted? You want to know the best part about this? There is a way to kill the enemies, which is by Savage Beastfly slamming down on them. But considering the flying enemies, which are 2 out of the 3 enemy types, are usually an inch off the ground, they never die, and you usually just get hit for trying to lead the Savage Beastfly to them in the process. Also, I don't even want to talk about the second fight, because first off, I'm not counting it, and 2, sure, it gets slightly better with the breakable platforms, even if they were just stolen from 4th Chorus, but it also just goes right back down with the new, even more annoying rage enemies! Congrats, Savage Beastfly. You get our first F tier. Now get out of my sight. Phantom is a boss that you can only get from going through a special area, which is the mist, which I think only works with a needle in. I had to search this up to even figure out what to even do here, because I had no clue what to do the first time. Once you complete the puzzle, I guess, you then proceed to go through the exhaust organ. Then finally, you arrive at Phantom. First off, the entrance, being a mist column, is pretty cool. Also, the music. It's the only one in the game that mainly features an organ. And with what area we're in, which is literally called the exhaust organ, just fits the atmosphere of the fight even more. I also love the voice lines. They just tend to always feel so expressive in this fight. There isn't too much I can say about our attack that I've basically already said about Lace or other bosses, but the spear throw is pretty cool, the mist columns add onto the fight well, and the disappearing and reappearing from the mist in the second phase is really sick. It's nice to see that the background also gets more misty in phase 2 for that same addition. and makes me like the fight even more than I already did. Phantom is another dual type fight that is done very well and is unique just all around. I don't think Phantom is just good enough for S, but I'll still give Phantom a high A tier. Ending off the Act 1 bosses is Last Judge. Last Judge is not exactly the best, but for the end boss of Act 1, I think they were great. I do like one particular thing about this boss though. Usually bosses at this point have some sort of cohesion and sometimes can vary slightly. Last Judge, however, has basically all their attacks be unique in how they move or what they do. And it gets even crazier with Phase 2. All her attacks are affected with fire, from fire rings to waves. Last Judge is very unique with her attacks. Also, just a tip if you're struggling on this boss, if you're having trouble fighting Last Judge or any other boss that deals with fire damage, I recommend equipping the Magma Bell as it reduces fire damage from 2 to 1 masks. Anyways, I'll be ranking the final boss of Act 1 in A tier. And now we move on to Act 2. And to start us off, we have the Cogwork Dancers. This is the first main boss in Act 2. And it's, sorry for spoilers, but it's one of the best in the game. The way the Cogwork Dancers go along with the music is absolute perfection. And the music even easily follows each phase's changes. Even the small detail of the gears foreshadowing what the next phase will be like is lovely. Not to mention, this boss is the only one to have not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 phases. And for very good reason. In Phase 1, the Cogwork Dancers start out by easing you into the fight. The music is somewhat slow-paced, and it basically sets the stage of what's to come. Next, Phase 2 doesn't bring out anything necessarily new, but it starts to get faster and a little bit more intense, as well as the music. Phase 3 is where the Cogwork Dancers truly shine. They're both off-sync, and instead of going together, they go one by one. It serves to trip you up, as well as to make things even more interesting. Then one of them dies, and the final phase starts. It's really slow, it's in a lower tone, it's sad. The dancer is alone, and the music encapsulates that. Their partner is dead, and all they can do is just push on a little more. S tier, no question. The second fight with Lace expands the Lace fight greatly in just about every way. She's faster and can telegraph you more with new moves. Her parry hits on the ground and above, has new attacks to further grain that fight, and with her upgraded speed, you're basically always on your toes wondering what she'll do next. She makes sure to give you basically no downtime with your new arsenal. Not even on the walls. Obviously, Lace V2 is overshadowed again by her final form, and will also be getting biased. But this fight is still not great for the first one, I won't lie. She'll be getting an A tier from me. Trobio explodes with personality and life within its fight. It really feels like an act that Trobio is putting on with flashy colors, attacks, and his signature Trobio! Everything shines red from his tornadoes, fireworks, smokes, bombs, and more. Also, I like the color red. He is fun to dodge at times, but isn't too much of a challenge. He does have another version later down the line though, and just like Lace, Trobio will be receiving bias. This fight is still great, and it really made me like Trobio a lot. It's also kind of funny how dramatic he is at times. His dramatic death, as well as the little detail of coming back to find out Trobio is playing dead, is sort of funny, and also kind of charming in a way. Trobio gets A tier. four brothers Cygnus and Gron have a pretty good sense of duality. Cygnus, or Sinus, I really don't think anyone cares. Cygnus uses more grounded attacks, while Gron uses more aerial attacks, making for a pretty fun challenge. I also like the lava fall that comes in and out in the last phase when you defeat one of them, so it doesn't make the fight feel so empty. Phase 1 doesn't really have anything though. Don't get me wrong, it's a nice touch for Gron to come in at phase 2, but I feel like enemies filling in that space before then isn't exactly the best thing to do here. Not to mention, there are only 2 enemies that appear only in phase 1, which makes it feel even more out of place. I probably would have just rather had either small hazards or new enemies entirely. Even with that problem, I think the fight is a fairly good challenge. The four brothers get B tier. Remember when I said that there was a boss hinted at down the line from before? That's the Raging Conchfly. The Raging Conchfly is, understandably, ticked off that you killed their partner, and tends to be way more aggressive because of that. Sure, the first phase is about the same, even though the boss is a lot faster, but the second phase is better. This time the Raging Conchfly has enemies and they don't simply just pop up, but 5 of them can spawn to burrow through the walls of the arena in quick succession. Though for the walls of enemies, you'll probably have enough damage to deal with them quickly, and they most likely won't be a big threat. The Raging Conchfly is not that much better than their predecessor, but I still will be putting them higher than their predecessor as well, but they're still gonna also be in C tier, so yeah, it's not even that much better anyway. Grol the Great is not exactly the most likable boss in Silksong conversations. On the surface, it doesn't really make much sense. Grol the Great tends to have pretty basic attacks, like his acidic spitting, his inhaling, which is actually pretty unique by the way, and other hazards and things featured in the fight. Grol the Great sounds like a pretty standard but good boss with all things considered. But that isn't everything. There are a few things that actually make this boss a living nightmare. And the funniest thing is that all this stuff isn't really even about Grol the Great himself. First off, the enemy waves. They are very annoying, with not only having ranged attacks, but also being very evasive. I won't go on this too long, but let's just say if I had to hypothetically compare what enemy would be the closest to the Primal Aspid, it would be these guys. Next, the Muck Maggot Infested Water. Oh my god. The poisonous water is extremely annoying to deal with. If you fall in there, if you want to get out of the effect, you essentially have to use the heal just for the maggots to get away. And considering how easy it is to fall in there, it makes this boss fight a lot more unpleasant. You will need the Wrath of Purity for this. Otherwise, this fight will be a living nightmare. Now, for the biggest complaint that everyone has been talking about. The one and only run back. The run back is pretty long, and you also have to go through the annoying enemies as well as the magnet-filled water too. And you want to know the best part? This is just the path with the hidden bench. The only way I found this out was from one of my friends telling me that it even existed. If I never found that bench, I would have to have gone through the entirety of Bile Water. This run back, as well as the other things I mentioned, takes this boss down so many levels. But the only reason I am putting Grol the Great in D instead of F is because the fight itself is actually pretty enjoyable at times. If it didn't have that, this could have honestly been dead last for me. Grol the Great, more like Grol the Not So Great. Disgraced Chef Lugoli is pretty forgettable, all things considered. The two special enemies at the beginning of the fight don't really add anything that special for me to care. Lugoli's attacks tend to be pretty basic, all having to do with maggot-filled glow balls, other than... yeah. C tier. Disgraced Chef Lugoli also has a Void Form in Act 3, if that means anything to you. Brood Mother is once again pretty forgettable. The enemy waves are pretty basic, with nothing to really stand out. Brood Mother just tends to have a high growth factor, with her spitting out muck as well as giving birth. I don't know, man. The slam attack in phase 2 also just reminds me of Gruz Mother. Not really much to say other than the fact that this boss is pretty disgusting. Brood Mother gets another C tier. I somewhat like Father the Flame. The boss focuses more on the survival aspect of the fight, as well as furthering this aspect by being the only boss that doesn't give Hornet any silk. The first phase is simple. You have to destroy the lanterns by pogoing off of them, while dodging the wisps. In phase 2, you have to dodge a circle of wisps that come out from time to time, while trying to destroy the core of the effigy. It's simple, but a pretty fun challenge. Father the Flame gets a low B tier, since it still isn't too interesting though. Second Sentinel is another great duel type of boss. They also feel like an upgraded version of the Lace V2 fight, but in a good way. The Second Sentinel still has enough to distinct themselves, like a wave slash and a rising slash, as well as a cross slash, and out of all the bosses that do it, I'd say fits them the best because of the type of fight this is. The wave slash can also be done in the air, and the movement they have is more focused on both offense and a little bit more on defense rather than just entirely on offense. I think it's a solid amount above Lace V2, but I don't think I'd say it's still good enough for S, so it lands in A tier. Voltworm is so boring. It only has 2 attacks: electric pillars and electric circles. That's it. The attacks are super easy to dodge, and if you ever get hit, you can simply just attack the boss for free heals because the boss only moves within a certain range inside of the arena at all times. And that's basically the entirety of the fight. This boss could have honestly been more fit for Act 1, to be honest, and Voltworm could have at least had a new attack later in the fight or something. The boss is pretty boring, and that's about it. D tier. The Unraveled starts off with another enemy gauntlet. Not like we had enough of those already so far. Not to mention, the enemies are so stupidly easy, I could honestly care less about them. They're also featured throughout the actual fight, and simply feel like they're only there to be used for free silk and nothing else. The actual boss is so basic that the best part about it is one single attack, which is the body spitting. The moving back and forth thing is unbelievably boring, because obviously it will be. And the only other thing that's in this fight besides the enemies are the spears, and they're so easy to dodge. You will genuinely get hit by these 2 times max. This boss is boring. It just feels like this boss was probably a lot cooler on paper but became so dull with execution. This boss really should have been in Act 1 rather than Act 2, simply because you'll most likely have so many upgrades you'll just render this boss as a joke. The Unraveled just gets D tier. You know, I honestly was wondering why First Sinner used the Widow theme, but then it clicked. They're both weavers, and the theme fits even more because they're both very fast-paced bosses. Anyways, First Sinner is an amazing boss, basically going off of Widow's playstyle, which is fast and engaging gameplay. The attacks also basically go off of Widow, but a lot faster and more intense, and the attacks are different from the bells. they've changed to be silk needles. The first center also has a much bigger hitbox than Widow, upping the challenge. Lastly, she spawns many silk circles across the arena as a new attack in Phase 2, with her attacks also getting faster and more frantic. First center adds onto the Widow fight perfectly, making it more challenging and focus-inducing. An amazing boss that builds upon Widow greatly. First center gets S tier. Now, we end off Act 2 with the regular final boss, Grandmother Silk. And this fight feels weirdly sort of underwhelming. Now, don't get me wrong, the boss is still great, but as at least a normal final boss for the game itself, it doesn't exactly live up to the standards I was hoping for. The difficulty was a lot easier than I was expecting, but I feel like that could vary for any player, so someone would give that a pass. Also, I don't think Phase 1 is any problem. Instead, it kinda lies more within Phase 2. Sure, the raining rocks and spikes pursued some type of challenge, I guess, but there aren't really any new attacks, just mainly hazards added to the fight that aren't exactly the most interesting. I would have honestly appreciated at least one new attack, or at least upgrades for previous attacks. Even with the difficulty being somewhat lackluster and not too much variety in the later parts of the fight, I still really like the boss for what it is. And the music is also stellar here as well. I think that Grandmother Silk goes in A tier. Now we are on Act 3 and we start off with Nihilith. You know, when you first think about it, a boss that forces you to get off the ground sounds great in concept, and can even be done in great ways, but Nihilith doesn't exactly meet up with the potential I think it could have had. Sure, I do like the strategic mix of how you move in Pogo, as well as mostly defensive attacks, but the thing is, the only thing that changes in the fight is just the ground not being there. The fight doesn't really take any new creative liberties, and some attacks just become somewhat easier with the ground gone. I feel like with new attacks and mechanics, this fight could have been better, but it still is good in what it does. I can easily say though, out of the 3 main heart bosses, this one is the weakest. Still gets at least a low B tier though, in my opinion. I'm honestly in awe with how amazing this boss is, in just about every single way. To start off, I do appreciate the new enemy type that's featured before the boss starts. Her boss fight music is beautiful, with the main star of the show being her singing, and she even has the little detail of stopping her singing when she staggered. The addition of the crowd in the background, making this feel like a genuine performance, is just a chef's kiss. This boss has by far the most variety of attacks, and tends to move in unique ways, so you're always on the lookout of what Carmelita could do next. She not only shows, but goes far as to represent what amazing flow is. Her Phase 2 is incredible, with her new slide attack as well as upgrades, but she can also vary from whether she uses her normal or upgraded versions for her attacks, which I find really cool. Lastly, in her Phase 3, she just goes all out. No stops, no room to breathe. She brings out her grand finale and absolutely barrages you. And with her variants of attacks and movement options, she is absolutely ballistic. This boss pops off with every new addition and never feels like anything is unnecessary. Carmelita goes into S tier. Absolute cinema, both figuratively and literally. Shrine Guardian Seth shows off some really good variants with this boss fight. The sword attacks are pretty good on their own, but the shield provides a great challenge and adds so much to the fight. Sith basically always keeps you on the lookout with his teleportation and explosive shield attacks, while also blocking a lot of your attacks with the shield, therefore making you have to rethink your strategies. Phase 2 also brings new stuff to the table, with his repeating explosive shield slams as well as giving him new movement with his attacks. This fight's variety makes it a great boss, and tends to be a tough and fun challenge. Seth gets a high A tier, but that's not all. I feel like it'd be right to talk about this. Seth Goldman was a person who was fighting cancer. Goldman was a young Hollow Knight fan, and he was able to meet up with Team Cherry and make a design for a character in Silksong, which is how Shrine Guardian Seth was made. Goldman, sometime after, tragically passed away, but was not only given this character for remembrance, but also even put in the credits of the game. Team Cherry really made this boss really great, and to also be featured in the game really makes this one of the most heartwarming characters that this game has to offer. At first, I thought Crust King Khan was pretty basic, but the more I delved into it, I realized that Khan was a lot better than I thought he was. The fight is, on surface, basically one attack, being the coral pillars, but the fight is really great when you focus on how he uses it. He can use them horizontally or vertically, he can do an aerial, he can cross them, spawn multiple from the ground, and in his second phase, he doubles his cross attack and can even spawn multiple from the ceiling. Add that with his movement and with his attacks basically being able to act as not only offense but also defense at the same time, and he makes for a very fun challenge. If Nihilith was the worst of the three main hard bosses, and Scarsinger Carmelita was the best of the three, Crust King Khan is definitely in the middle of the three. Crust King Khan gets A tier. Let's be honest here. Most of us saw the name Bell Eater and probably thought Bell Beast was, well, dead. Luckily, that wasn't the case though. Anyways, the Bell Eater is a solid boss. I do like that you can't simply hang onto a wall because the walls are literally the centipede. So if you get close to the walls, they attack you. The walls of the arena also spread out more when the Bell Eater is in its second phase. It mainly uses two things to attack, its head and rear end. Yes, seriously. And I can't believe I'm also saying this, but the boss actually poops blood bombs at you. I said that correctly. The bulldoze attack in the second phase isn't really that special, and the spit and bomb attacks also get upgrades, and that's about it. The Bell Eater isn't too special, but I can definitely say when the Bell Beast absolutely demolished Bell Eater, that was actually peak. Low B tier. This boss really can create some emotional damage for me, but that obviously doesn't excuse the fact that Lost Garment doesn't really have anything to offer. Sure, I do like the infused void attacks that he has, but they aren't really that much of a challenge, and you can also just pogo for basically most of the time. I feel like if the fight would have been harder, or if there was some new attack that stands out with the void, this probably could have been better. It could be this easy because from what I've seen, the Garmin and Zaza fight is probably the easiest boss within the game, especially where it stands. But considering that we're in Act 3 at this point, I don't really think that justifies what this boss could have been. Lost Garmin gets a C tier. But man, when Zaza is just hiding in the background during the fight, not to mention when Zaza looks over his body, is genuinely one of the most sad things in the game. I'm sorry, Zaza. Crawfather is another pretty good boss. The enemy waves aren't that hard, but they have new metal headwear, so you can't simply just pogo off of them, which makes them harder and honestly more fun to deal with. Crawfather can be pretty simple to deal with at times, but he replaces that empty space with the new enemies from earlier. Just one big flaw with this fight. Crawfather is too slow. Every single attack feels like he gives you too much time to react. Even with this chain attack later in the fight, and as well as the enemies he spawns, they don't really make the fight that hard. I don't think Crawfather is bad by any means, but with that slow speed he has, he goes from a B tier down to a C tier. Trobio is back for a rematch, and everything is amped up. This fight tends to add on to what was the empty space that was in the original. Lots of his attacks have upgrades. Like for example, the tornado attack now has an explosive glitter trail, the smoke bombs explode on all 4 sides, and he even has a new attack, being a cross explosion. Trobio makes sure to add on to the fight without making it feel like it's overwhelming, but still an amazing challenge. Also, basically the entire color palette here is now purple. And you know what I like more than red? Purple. He not only even has a new death animation, which is honestly better than the last in my opinion. Also, instead of pretending to be dead, Trobio instead, if you wait long enough in the arena after the boss fight, will come up from under the floorboards. And I really appreciate them changing both of those small details. Tormented Trobio is an amazing boss that builds off the original Trobio fight perfectly. S tier. You know, it would just be one thing if this boss just had nothing to really stand out. I would quickly talk about this boss, think it's mid, and move on. The thing is, this boss has nothing. And I really mean absolutely nothing. The one attack this boss has, which are the spinning blades, combined with the immediate teleportation, and this boss is probably the most unbearable boss ever. The boss basically boils down to a wild goose chase that takes forever. You're basically only allowed to get 1 hit in per teleport, but more times than not, the wall of spinning blades will just stop you from getting there in time. And it gets even worse. In phase 2, the spinning blades basically take up the entire arena, therefore making this boss take even longer. This boss is only here to waste your time. I want you guys to find one thing that makes this boss worth fighting. Please. I want to hear about that in the comments. Genuinely. Until then, this boss is worthless in every single way, and only serves to be an utter nuisance. Never thought I'd be talking about Pale Stag this harshly of all things. What am I doing right now? F tier. Worthless. The Watcher at the Edge is another dual boss fight. It doesn't exactly work as good as most of the duels so far though. They basically have 2 attacks, an upward to downward slash, and a multi-swing. They can also do an immediate downward slash, but it isn't too different from the first attack. You can basically just abuse the first attack, because if you far away enough, the Watcher will mostly burrow into the sand to get to where you are, and use the up and down slash again. This fight isn't really as good as most of the duels featured in the game, and it really goes down because of the free arena. Like, the arena is like very big, basically giving you all this free space to fight, making this boss a lot easier. But the Watcher at the Edge can still provide a solid challenge. Low B tier. It is pretty cool how you enter the boss fight, because you're basically just on a normal quest until this point, following the path along the Hidden Hunter's wish. Then suddenly, you get put into a trap and fall down to the boss arena. As cool as the build-up may be, the boss of Gur the Outcast isn't as cool as I thought it would be. Gur's main attack for the entire fight are the barb traps, which are spike traps that stay in place until they get activated and spread their spikes out. There are also spikes beneath the floor that come out every once in a while. Let me just tell you something. If you make the center of a fight consists of one single attack. The very least you can do for the fight is make the attack not only unique, but also challenging, which the traps are not challenging at all in this boss fight. The only time they get even somewhat challenging at all is when they start to get somewhat cluttered up, and that tends to only be your fault anyway for them to get that bad. Also, the spikes I mentioned just go away after like not even 2 seconds, which isn't even enough time for Gur to pop back out from the ground, therefore making the spikes kind of pointless. This boss could have been way better if it was more optimized. D tier. The Clover Dancers is a rematch or a harder version of the Cogwork Dancers. I really like the addition of one of the Clover Dancers not being able to be hit, having this white mist sort of look, while still being able to attack you. So you mainly have to focus on the Green Prince, and it provides a pretty cool challenge you don't see anywhere else in the game. The Cyclone attack is also a pretty cool addition, being different from the flurry of slashes in the original fight. Now, I would put this fight higher than the Cogwork Dancers if it weren't for a big problem I have with this fight. The emotional tension the original had is just gone. I do think that the Clover Dancers still do specific things better in the sense of more difficulty as well as a little bit more variety, basically giving you what would have been the perfect addition to the original Cogwork Dancers fight. Thing is, the fight goes through phase 1 normally, as well as going off of phase 3 from the OG, but once that second phase ends, the fight ends abruptly. There's no emotional end phase, there's no big additions added, it's basically just there to be a reminder to a boss of what could have been. While the fight is still great on its own right, this is the only fight within the game that I would actually consider to say is actually worse than their predecessor. Clover Dancers gets an A tier. If we were ranking bosses based off of missed potential, Plasmified Sango would be first. No contest. You're telling me that the only boss to have lifeblood is one of the most dull and unfulfilling bosses in the game? There was so much you could have done with this, and we somehow got this? It's even more sad that, in hindsight, being the only health regenerating boss at all times sounds really cool, but with the way they do it, it's so uninteresting. Also, just to add even more salt on the wound, if you use Thread Storm, not only can you block the one attack this guy has, but also basically makes the whole passive healing thing completely worthless. So much missed potential that this boss could have had. It just doesn't feel like Senga was giving justice for this. F tier. Just sad. If any enemy had to resemble the Primal Aspid the most, it would be the Stilken. But if any boss had to resemble the Primal Aspid the most, it would be Penstress. Why is she so evasive? Like, some attacks are pretty fun to dodge, but she basically spends 3/4 of the fight simply being in the air. Get down and fight me! Boss took me a genuine 5 minutes to beat, and with nothing changing throughout the fight, it quickly becomes a slog to get through. It also doesn't help with the Primal Aspid attack she unleashes, making this fight even more unbearable, until she decides to stop using that dang cloak and actually come down to the arena to fight me. She's getting D tier. You know, I could simply just put this boss where I'd rank it. Nearly everyone would agree, and we could just move on to the final ranking. But obviously, that wouldn't be doing this boss justice. The true final boss is finally upon us, and that is Lost Lace. Lost Lace pulls out all the stops and plays her part of true final boss to perfection. Lace uses the Void to spring out an insane amount of attacks. Her parries have Void Tendrils, with her dash also having Void Tendrils as well. Then phase 2 begins, and that's when the fight truly starts to shine. Now, she can release void tendrils from the ground, spit out shadow blades across the arena, and even summon shadow projectiles. But that isn't even it! In her third phase, you now have to deal with all of that while massive void saws come out of the ground every once in a while. And lastly, her teleporting down slash also does void waves now. The building upon the first fight to the second was already really good. But the building from the second to the last is on a whole new level. You know what this represents? An amazing and perfect true final boss, but also a barrier. A barrier that is standing between you and the true end of the game. And Lace will do anything to try and stop you from breaking that one last barrier. Lost Lace is the best final challenge I honestly could have ever asked for. She not only does her role, but exceeds it immensely. I love this boss, and I know that many, and I mean many, people love her too. Lost Lace gets the final S tier. So now with every boss ranked, we can finally do the final ranking. And this took ages. Trying to find out the top bosses and bottom bosses were pretty easy, but everything else? Yeah, that was a whole new challenge in itself. Trying to figure out what goes in one spot or another right below was not pleasant for me. There are some bosses that might basically just be equal from others, so don't get too harsh on me when I put, I don't know, a certain mid-boss in 27th place rather than 28th? I guess? Basically, don't make too much of a deal out of it. I'll be happy to discuss this in the comments. Civilly, that is. Also, if some rankings seem a bit off, like say for example, like someone I said was actually going to be high in a specific tier is low in a specific tier, or vice versa, the notes that you heard were the ones that I was coming up with along the way. This final tier list is basically like a revision. So if some bosses are in different spots than what I actually said they could be, don't take it too harshly. Anyways, I'll be going through the final ranking like so. We're quickly revisiting the bottom 3 bosses, then I'll speedrun through 4th to last, all the way to 4th, then finally, I'll also quickly revisit the top 3 bosses. By the way, these 3 worst bosses in the game are the only ones that are in F tier, so these ones are truly the bottom of the barrel. Now, without further ado, it's time to finally finish this. The 3rd worst boss in Silksong is Savage Beastfly. Savage Beastfly is unbelievably annoying, and the enemy spam just makes it so much worse. Why do so many bosses fill the empty space in their fights with enemies? This boss especially didn't need any because it is obese. And if flying enemies miss Savage Beastfly's slim hitbox one more time, I'm going to actually have a spasm. The 2nd worst boss in Silksong is Plasmified Zango. The Threadstorm. The boss becomes completely useless because of Threadstorm. Like, who was the smart guy that thought this guy was a good boss for Act 3? Why can you block the one and only attack this guy has? And why was the cool concept of a boss featured with lifeblood just wasted and thrown in the trash? And even then, there is still one boss worse. The bottom of the barrel, the trashiest of the trash, and the worst boss in Hollow Knight Silksong is Pale Stag. Pale Stag is completely worthless. There is nothing, and I mean nothing, that is there for me to care about this boss at all. All this boss is a complete and utter waste of my time. I can give the 3rd and 2nd worst this. No matter how bad they are, I could at the very least see somewhat of a genuine direction that they were going in, because they had something that made me care to know about their existence. Hailstag is the only one that feels like an utter nuisance, not because I hate them with a burning passion, but because I don't even care about even the slightest of details that this boss has to offer. Now it's time for the lightning round. For each tier, we're gonna go from lowest till we get to number 4. Then again, we'll talk about the final 3 best bosses. Here we go. For D tier, we have Grohl the Great, Double Moss Mother, The Unraveled, Voltworm, Gur the Outcast, Skull Tyrant, and Penstress. For C tier, we have Lost Garment, Disgracia Flagoli, Broodmother, Grey Conchflies, Raging Conchfly, Moss Mother, and Crawfather. For B tier, we have Father of the Flame, Nihilith, Bell Eater, Watcher at the Edge, Four Brothers Cygnus and Gron, Bell Beast, Lace, and Morwing. For A tier, we have Sister Splinter, Shrine Guardian Seth, Grandmother Silk, Crust King Khan, Lace V2, Last Judge, Second Sentinel, Trobio, Phantom, Fourth Chorus, Clover Dancers, and Widow. And finally, for 5th and 4th in our S tier, we have Cogwork Dancers and Tormented Trobio. And now we get to the 3 that are the best. The 3rd best boss in Silksong is First Sinner. First Sinner builds off of Widow, an already great boss that, if you somehow already need a refresher, is 6th on the list, in the very top of A tier. And since First Sinner is simply just a better version of Widow, I feel like it makes sense why she's here. I love the fast engaging gameplay, the music to match a Widow because they're both weavers, and the silk needles are honestly better looking as an attack than the bells in my opinion. The runner-up in Silksong is Lost Lace. You probably thought I was going to put this boss in first place because I talked about her so passionately. But the only reason I talked about her that way was because she's the true final boss, so it simply felt more mandatory. Don't get me wrong, this boss still deserves this spot. No doubt, she uses the Void to her advantage for the entire fight, and it encapsulates the fight amazingly, because this boss is basically the heart of the Void. The barrier thing also still stands, because all of the stops are pulled for this boss. Yet, there is still one better. And if you've been paying attention, you probably already know who this is. The crown jewel, the cream de la crop, and the best boss in Hollow Knight Silksong is Scar Singer Carmelita. The flow, immaculate. The attacks, immaculate. The freaking music is incredible. This boss is the representation of a perfect boss. Her design is probably my favorite, and I'll obviously take it over a color swap palette of Lace any day. And the background, being a full crowd of enemies from the area, is also amazing. And again, I would take it over a basic black goo background any day. I know it's supposed to fit the vibe, but still, I like it more. And also, this is my ranking, and I can basically do what I want with it. So, yeah. She stops singing when she's staggered. She's the only boss to use her normal and upgraded versions of her attacks at the same time, and she even goes full ballistic in phase 3. She really is perfect. And that's why I think Scar Singer Carmelita is the best boss in Silksong. Wow. This full journey of a ranking was honestly more enticing than I originally thought. Also, here's the full final ranking. And thank you to Red Runner for creating it. This video took an immense amount of work to script, voice, edit, just simply a lot of work went into this. Like, I think a month and a half's worth. If you made it through the entire video, I really appreciate that. I honestly hope to make more of these in the future. But that'll also depend on how well this does, since I usually don't get too much reception. And also, this was a pretty big project. It might be a while before I can do anything like this ever again. Anyways, Thank you for watching my first ever ranking video, and feel free to discuss your opinions in the comments. I would really love to hear them out. But again, civilly, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.